Hello, welcome to the Minnesota Vikings. Absolutely refuse to allow you to have a very calm Sunday and will only bring every single game down to the final drive. Post-game podcast. Matthew Coller, Paul Hodowanic of WCCO Radio. The Vikings are now 6-1 after defeating the Arizona Cardinals. And I'm going to start this out, Paul, with a statement. I think that this one was the Vikings' best win of the year, the way that they played as far as a complete game. Was it beautiful? Was it the 1998 Rams or Vikings? Or was it 99 Rams? Either way, was it the greatest show on turf? No. Was it the 2000 Ravens or the 85 Bears? No, it was not one of the great performances ever seen before in history. But against a team that has some very talented players, including, wow, DeAndre Hopkins, a quarterback capable of making lots of plays with his legs, which Kyler Murray did, and a defense with enough firepower up front to cause some problems for the Vikings, several sacks, lots of issues at the right guard position, which we'll get into. They overall put up 380 yards, 25 first downs, averaged 6 yards a carry on the ground, which was very impressive today. Justin Jefferson had a couple of good catches. They got some other people involved, and they also took mostly advantage of the mistakes that were made, and there were many, by the Arizona Cardinals. And I thought this was a good win. Like, there were times before in recent weeks where, man, you beat Detroit like that, huh? Or, man, you beat Chicago like that. I don't think that Arizona quite falls in that category. I know they are not a perfect team or maybe even a super contending team, but they're also not flaming trash like maybe Detroit is. So to win the way that they did, and I never thought that Arizona was going to be able to take the ball the length of the field. They were really one or two plays away or one or two holding penalties away from extending the gap in this game. I never expected Arizona to just completely give up after the Vikings got ahead and for them to be totally shut down with the players that they have. And I would say that this is kind of what you were looking for, about 80% of what you were looking for when we went into the bye and said they need to be better in a lot of areas. Running the ball was one of them, and that they had a consistent and excellent running game. They could certainly push the ball down the field a little bit more and only average 6.5 yards per pass attempt, but they did not throw any interceptions. They had the one strip sack, and that was it for big key mistakes. And they took advantage when Arizona gave them all sorts of mistakes throughout the day. And I don't have as many qualms. I mean, I'm still seeing some on Twitter reaction to like, oh, well, it wasn't a mind-blowing victory that they had here. But I think it was a well-played one overall, with a few shortcomings that were exposed a little bit on this team in the secondary, on the offensive line. They were never going to be perfect, but they're 6-1. And if they play like this, I think they can beat a lot of the teams left on their schedule. If they play like they did, say, against like the Lions or New Orleans, then no. But if this is who they're going to be and they leave this game largely healthy outside of Dalvin Tomlinson getting banged up, then they can continue to win a lot of games like this.
Yeah, I think generally, hello, by the way. I think we have to shorten up the name of the podcast. It's getting, I think we're just rambling. I forget how much you just said there, but we're getting to the point where I don't even know if it's going to fit in the podcast title. So I think my main takeaway is the Vikings are generally, I think, just incapable of blowing out an opponent, and that doesn't necessarily. I mean, you wish that they could, but I think this iteration of the team just has not been consistent in all three phases to the point where they've been able to blow out a team, and I'm just not sure they're going to be able to, but they have shown they haven't needed to so far. They've been able to scratch and claw enough. And so I think today was another example of that. And I agree, it was their best performance, at least since week one against the Packers, in terms of the defense made stop after stop when they really needed to get a stop. Like towards the end of the game, the Vikings had two offensive possessions where they could have put the game away, and they went three and out in both those drives. And both times the defense came back and made good plays to keep them in this game. And so I think largely, and to their credit, they've picked another unit up when they've needed to, and they haven't really been able to get downhill with all units going. And that's why we're not seeing them win these games running away. But as we're seeing this year in the NFL, that's just not happening across the NFL. Most teams, if you're not Buffalo and Kansas City, you're not going to just blow the doors off of an opponent. And I think when you see 6-1, you hope that your team has that capability to just go into overdrive and to put a team away in the second quarter. I just don't think that's going to be the way this team is going to be able to operate. They're going to have defensive lapses. They're going to have offensive lapses. That's just with the personnel that they have on this team. That's just the way it's going to be. And so I think this game is emblematic of that, but I also think it's emblematic of the fact that they do still have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. When you give Dalvin Cook a week off like the bye, he normally looks good. We've seen that as a trend throughout his career. When he gets some rest, he's going to look good in some games. So you got that today. Zadarius Smith was all over the place today. The corners were playing pretty well. Patrick Peterson had a solid game against his old team, unless you were matched up against DeAndre Hopkins. Then you were not having a good game. But generally, you're seeing these bits and pieces. I just am not sure the totality will ever be able to fully put it together for 48 minutes where you're just beating the brakes off a team. And that may come to pass when you play the Bills and you need to play that well. Maybe you fall short. But the way that this team has been talked about the last couple of weeks, barely surviving the Bears and the Saints of the world and the Dolphins with a backup quarterback, this game was a marked improvement, especially on defense, I think, from those games. And so you're seeing that, hey, if they can beat this caliber of team, which I think is just a half step up against some of the other ones, that gives you confidence that they can go in and beat Washington and that they can handily get into the playoffs like this and likely win the division. And then it's just about those game-on-game matchups and can you get hot. So I think this is an emblematic game of how they need to play going forward. And if they play this way going forward, that they will be able to sustain maybe not a 800 win percentage like they currently have, but they're going to be able to stay above 500 long enough to get into the double-digit wins, to get at least one home playoff game. And at that point, then you just see what happens in the playoffs. So I think that was my large takeaway is they're never gonna blow a team out. They had a chance to do that up 14-3 today, and they just seem like they can never fully get there, but they're gonna remain competitive in all these games. And they have enough talent and they have enough big plays that they can make to where they are going to beat these teams and they're going to be right in the thick of it when it comes to playoffs.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on you not knowing how many minutes are in an NFL game, but we can move on.
60.
There's 60, not
just
48.
covered high school football yesterday. It's 48. I'm just, I'm all moving around.
Yeah, I mean, you do you wear a lot of hats, including a very cool one right now. But no, to your point, that's exactly right. That when you talk about a team that's 6-1, and you look at Philadelphia, who is the class of the NFC, Philadelphia has had a lot of very impressive wins. They beat the Vikings handily. They beat Dallas handily. They won another game today where they faced an inferior opponent and they said, no, you will not be joining us today. We are going to smash you. That has not been who the Vikings are, and I don't think that they ever really can be. I mean, the offensive inconsistency at times where you think they can cruise down the field 75, 80 yards at any given time, and they did today at times where they just had these easy drives, big catches by Jefferson, but then it's setbacks, it's penalties, 20 penalties. This was a noon game. This is probably the latest you and I have ever connected on the post game to talk because of the referees, which is a whole other thing. They were just having a party out there today with all the different penalties. I don't think I've seen a kickoff return where they called an illegal block on it. I mean, there was also a taunting penalty on Garrett Bradbury, which here's what it means to be inside the locker room, Paul, that only this type of insight can come out. I know what Garrett Bradbury said to induce that penalty. Would you like to know?
I would like to know. Are you going to tell me?
He said, and I'm going to have to check if we're going to have to put like a parental advisory on the podcast. He said, "You're soft," to his opponent. So, I mean, I should have given a little break there and said, put the earmuffs on if the kids are listening. He said, "You're soft." I mean, I don't know what the referees were just like in cartoonish mode today, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, it did affect the game. And if they had lost this game, we would have looked at a bunch of different penalties, a holding on Adam Thielen, a holding on the final drive that set them back where they could have just put the game away. And instead they had to give Arizona one more chance. But if you're Arizona, you're just as displeased where they had penalties that put them back at the goal line where Kyler Murray threw the interception. But moving aside from how much fun the refs had flinging their flags today and how obnoxious that was, the overall way that the Vikings have to win, I think, because it's not going to be a start to finish put the gas pedal down and plow forward on offense and score and score and score. And then on defense, shut the other team down. It has to be this way. Big plays. That's just who they have to be. And that's what they were today. They sacked Kyler Murray 4 times. Zadarius Smith is just a monster, which we knew he was capable of. It was all about staying healthy. He has been the best version of himself. And especially these last 2 weeks, just a beast. And he was that today and against the backup left tackle. But you have to give the Vikings defensive line credit for pressuring Kyler Murray. They got the big sacks. They got interceptions, which Murray threw the ball right to them, but they caught it. So this is my point. It's like you need that to happen. You need when the ball bounces off the punt returner, which it's happened 3 times in the last 4 weeks, to just talk about that luck factor, but you have to take advantage of all those things. And today on offense, they averaged 5.6 yards a play, which is solid. But where they were really great was big plays. 30-yard run from Dalvin Cook, 29-yard catch, 28-yard catch, 18-yard catch. Like they did not consistently throw for 7 to 10 to 12 yards, but they hit on these big plays that drove scoring drives. And when you look up at the end of the game and you've got a couple of turnovers, a couple of huge plays that resulted in scoring drives, and then you've scored 34 points, I mean, it's very hard to look at that and go like, I don't know, boys. But I think visually and knowing what is kind of sustainable, that's where I think the hesitation is. And I think that what we have is just a truth about this team. Like, can you do it each week where you have to rely on big plays? Usually the answer is kind of no, but I think this year maybe the answer is kind of yes. They will have a game at some point. Maybe it's next week. Buffalo is definitely going to be a problem for them where we go like, oh, and it all ran out for that game. But when you have a lot of star talent, Zadarius Smith gets a lot of sacks and a lot of pressures. You have Jefferson, big plays. If Dalvin Cook looks like this, if they run block like this, which was fantastic today, the way that they were blocking in the run game, and it's been great all year, like these things can continue to produce some of those big plays as we go down the stretch. And that's why I thought that today, even though there were parts that were uninspiring, there were parts that were frustrating, and you felt like Arizona should have been put away early in the game, I think it told us a lot about who they have to be going forward.
Yeah, and I think coming into the year, we knew that they had flaws. And I think when you see that their record is now 6-1, if you aren't watching the games, you're thinking, okay, they fixed a lot of their flaws. And generally, a lot of the flaws that they had coming into the year are still question marks. There's still question marks behind Justin Jefferson in the receiving core. There's still at least one questionable offensive lineman on the team. There's still a defense that can give up a play or two, can look nice, can not look nice, or relying on health of some of their star players. Like all those things were things we knew were flaws coming into the year. And I think the 6-1 maybe clouds that, or you want to think that those things are fixed, and they're not. The Vikings are still, despite being 6-1, a flawed team. But to credit them, this is a team that has shown itself to be really, really clutch in big moments. They continue to generate turnovers in big spots when they need them. At some point, maybe that runs out, but right now you just have to continue to give them credit for coming up with big plays. The Vikings stop Kyler Murray driving down the field on the last drive of the game. They sack him twice at the end of the game. They stop him on the drive before. Like, they have consistently come up in big spots and done what they've needed to do to win. That doesn't, from a macro sense, doesn't take away the fact that they still have these little flaws that may or may not pop up these next couple games. They're things we knew were issues. But so far, unlike they have in previous years past, they've been able to avoid them. They haven't allowed those things to sink them. Like a strip sack of Kirk Cousins in previous years might have sunk this team, and they just don't ever look the same. Justin Jefferson was looking pouty at times, running around. Then he continued to come in and make big play after big play. Like some of the things that have sunk them in the past haven't, and maybe that's coaching, whatever that is. Maybe that's just now getting a taste of this winning and know that you can come back from these things and doing it over and over again, that it builds up a confidence. But either way, they're finding some ways in kind of those intangible and kind of like in the cracks and crevices around the larger frame of this team to edge, to like really edge things out and get wins when you think things are in the balance. So they're not going to continue to be 6-0 in one-score games, but because of how they've started and the way that they've done, I have confidence that they're going to win more of these games than they're going to lose when it comes down to it. They've just shown now at this point that they're able to do that in a really strong manner. So I think, again, they still have those flaws you might not expect from a 6-1 team, but they're 6-1. And every other team around them in the NFC has allowed their flaws to eat them alive to the point where they have at least several wins, and the Vikings have not done that.
You know, I did think that they would have some regression in a good way when it came to the one-score games, because that's just kind of the ebb and flow of the NFL. One year it doesn't go your way, another year it does. Did not expect this, though. I did not expect them all to go for the Vikings. But this was one that I would say is sort of a one-score game in name only. Like, remember the one against Chicago last year where Chicago was down the whole game. It was a 2-score game. And then at the very end, they scored kind of a bogus touchdown. Well, in this case, I mean, they should have been up 9 points. They doink an extra point, and the game really should have been over. And I think that's why I'm less apt to say, hey, let's look at all the shortcomings, and you can't keep getting away with this. Like you said at one point, the Jesse Pinkman thing, like, this wasn't a you can't keep getting away with this. This is you need your star players to continue to make huge plays for you in order to win. And I think that for the most part, if they remain healthy, they can do that in a lot of games against a lot of teams, maybe that are not perfect themselves. I mean, look down the road. Does anyone think that the Jets or the Giants are perfect, flawless teams? I think there's really only 2 teams that you look at on the entire rest of the schedule and go, yeah, though it could be pretty hard. That would be Dallas and the Buffalo Bills. And that's really it. And Dallas kind of put on a show today. That's what I expect from them. I think that they're a legit contender. But aside from that, I mean, you're really talking about a lot of teams that are like Arizona, where they have reasons why they could beat you if you don't show up and if you don't make big plays, but also you have enough talent to outperform them. And at the moment, enough health to do the same. I also think that sometimes something that isn't really real feels real to the team, and that matters more than whether it's really real. Follow me here. Like,
I got you.
Think about this. If a team is struggling hitting in baseball and they hire a new hitting coach, like, did that guy do anything massively different? Like, maybe not. Like, maybe it was just, a different approach or something, but maybe it's just a little more belief in themselves to be able to say, you know what, that last guy. And it feels like there's just a rallying cry here. Like, Kirk Cousins is wearing chains and running for 17-yard touchdowns. And even though he's not performing better, this is the same or worse Kirk Cousins than we've seen. 6.5 yards per attempt is a whole 1.5 yards different from what he's been in previous years. And yet there seems to be more confidence by the team surrounding Kirk Cousins. And because of the previous results and because of that belief on what they were sold on from day one, you're hearing it so much from week to week from these players. Like, really, the player-driven approach from Kevin O'Connell from day one. That's one of the reasons we're so confident and everything else. And so there is, of course, the cynical part of us that wants to say, yeah, momentum's not real. But who says it's not for them, right? Like, it matters to the way that they're feeling. Like, every time they're in a tight game, hey, we're going to pull this off because we have done that all year, because we're confident, because we changed coaches. And that's an okay logic for them to have. Like, I'm not going to tell you you're completely wrong for having that logic. And confidence is just a massive thing in sports. And this team is oozing it because they seem to believe that no matter what happens during a game, they have a chance to win. And so there is, of course, a cynical part of me that thinks some of this will run out. But also, it's not like they were so miserable today and barely came out with a win like I thought about Miami. I just thought Miami should have won that game about 5 times over and didn't. This was not a 10-punt performance. This was not one where they couldn't run the ball. And I think that really underscores something I want to talk about, Paul, is like, it doesn't matter that Mike Zimmer was right about having to run. He was, but they need to lean into that. And today I thought where Kevin O'Connell was really at his best was they had a drive or two that went sideways, and it seemed like they were kind of throwing a little too much. And they just went back to it and said, let's keep this simple. Let's run the football. And with teams so worried about Justin Jefferson, that you're getting 5.5, 6 yards every carry. At one point in the first half or into the third quarter, it was over 7. It was ridiculous how much success they were having, and he did not go away with it from it. He did not get antsy. And I thought that played a major role in why they were able to win. So it's like some of the things that have happened in the past that shape our sample size might be changing even in real time. And one of those was Kevin O'Connell realizing like you actually can lean on Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison in this run game.
Yeah, and today they did it against, like, this necessarily wouldn't have been the opponent that I think they would have 100% gotten the run game back on track against. Arizona has been in the top 10 of like holding teams rushing, like rush yards allowed. They're in the top 10. They were 6th in Football Outsiders rush defense DVOA. So this is a team that throughout this year has been a pretty stout run defense, but all day long they were just creating massive holes everywhere, whether it was Mattison, whether it was Cook. Kirk getting in on it for first a small, just little scramble that kind of kept the chains moving. And then obviously the one that capped off the drive, he probably should have done it that one more time. What was it, on like a 3rd and 1 or a 2nd and 1, when he opted to throw to Justin Jefferson when he just had the easy yards. And I think you saw O'Connell talking to him right after, I'm assuming, just saying, hey, take the yards, let's live to fight another down. So yeah, this was not against a bad rush defense. This was against a team that you would have thought would have been, you're going at them with the passing game, and that struggled a little bit at times. But as they always do, when they need a big play, they find Justin Jefferson, and no matter if he's blanketed, he's going to come up with a catch. But yeah, I think the fact that they were able to get the run game going today, able to do it with both their rushers, and to just create massive holes. I don't think this was Cook or Mattison just creating out of meh blocking. This was big holes pushing down the field. Like, that's what you want to see from this offensive line. And I think largely 4/5 of it has been playing pretty strong on both pass and rush. They've had that one weak spot with Ed Ingram, which we may need to talk about. Do they need to try to figure out something else? Do they go to Schlottman? Do they go somewhere else with that guard spot? But at least in the run game, they've held up really well. At least they did today. And you can just tell that calms them, that gets Kirk into 2nd and manageables, 3rd and manageables, which is really important. I wrote about that last week. This team is really bad when they're behind the sticks, 2nd and long, 3rd and long. They're one of the worst offenses in the NFL. And so the best way to do that is to run the ball effectively, because you're going to find yourself in 2nd and 3rd and manageables a lot. Previously, they had really been able to do that with the passing game and getting kind of the quick passing game going to set up. And they can continue to do that. But if they have the ability to run the ball, that just opens up so many more things for them. It allows them to control the clock more than they have in the past. It just opens up a lot of things. And so even though they ran the ball super well, like, the Cardinals still had an opportunity to stay in this game. And largely that's because passing is just so much like more important. And so the Vikings still need to figure out a few things with their passing game if they really want to have one of these like holistically dominant offensive performances. But if they can have 1 or 2 of these games every so often where they don't have to rely on Kirk throwing it a bajillion times and throwing for 300 yards, that can only help them. And so the fact that they're able to put up 34 points with a bad Kirk Cousins game in pretty much every respect, that's a really good sign for the way this team is playing.
Yeah, I could see Mike Zimmer. There's a Jaguars fan GIF where the camera just really focused on this one Jaguars fan. He's just like got this baffled look, and he puts his hand up like, what? Like, huh? That's Mike Zimmer. Like, what? Now you guys are praising running the football? It's like, well, things do change. It is a bit of a different landscape, but also, I mean, the fact of the matter with Kirk Cousins is and will always be that when he is getting Dalvin Cook going, everything is going to be better for him. And I think we always recognize that's a fact. It was just, hey, when it's a 2-score deficit and you're 2nd and 13, you probably shouldn't run the ball. Like, it was never don't give it to Dalvin. It was, let's do this on a little more intentional and intelligent type of way, as opposed to just run the ball. And so, but I think for Kevin O'Connell, he had to learn kind of early, A, some of the strengths and weaknesses of his quarterback, but B, that you can lean on this offensive line and these running backs. They're both very talented running backs. And this offensive line is the best run blocking line since, I think, 2019, when Dalvin Cook had his best career season, that they were really dominant on the offensive line run blocking. And they were not that last year. In fact, I thought they were kind of a mediocre to poor run blocking offensive line. And most running backs go as the offensive line goes. Dalvin Cook can add you a little more juice, but I didn't think he did anything today that was unbelievable. It was just like their run blocking was extremely good, and they can continue to do that, I think, on a week-to-week basis. Now, we've gotten 25 minutes into this, and I think we're in agreement. Like, this was not a fraudulent win or anything like that, an impressive victory for them. But there are some things we need to discuss that did not go their way and that are problematic. And now the bar is not set at, hey, well, can they potentially maybe win this division, or could they possibly be good? Like, now you're 6-1. Now you're good. Now you can start working them phones actually to make a big trade. And after seeing this, like, isn't this the reason to make a big trade, to get better than this when you're 6-1? But the right guard position is and forever and always will be a problem. I said to Alec Lewis, who's in his first year covering the team, I said, when you write your first "The Vikings right guard is a problem" article, then you're really on the beat. Like, now you've joined the squad. Ed Ingram got destroyed today, and they have Chris Reed on this team. Austin Schlottman has played before. Heck, Oli Udoh was a better right guard last year probably than Ingram in some ways. I think Ingram is a decent run blocker, if not a good one. So I don't know if they want to upset the apple cart there, but you can't have Wash JJ Watt throwing you around the way that they did. You can't have blitzes coming up the middle untouched. He seems to be confused when it comes to anything else other than a straight rush, but even straight rushes are beating him. I think there has to be some consideration, and this is what's going to be tough for them, because you win a game, but you have to be considering at least bringing in Chris Reed, who is a proven, solid, slightly below average, experienced right guard who was legitimately decent for the Indianapolis Colts last year. He has to be an upgrade from Ingram. And yet, you're 6-1. So do you make any changes? But also, Washington's got a D-line. If you wait, and Buffalo, if you wait, somebody's going to punish you big time for having that weakness. And I think now would be the time to say, hey, we're in this to win this, not to develop a right guard. Let's make a change. Because after today, that was one of the maybe poorest performances by a guard, and think about where that bar is. That was Dakota Dozier level, where, if you're watching the guard get beat from the press box over and over again, you could see it live. It's pretty tough. So I think that is a serious challenge for Kevin O'Connell. Do you pull a string here, or do you keep believing in the rookie, who I think we've got a sample size enough to say is in over his head?
Yeah. And it's another one of those things where at the beginning of the year, you're not, even in your wildest dreams, I don't think you're thinking you're going 6-1 or hoping you're going 6-1. And you're seeing Ed Ingram as a player that you're developing for now, hopefully can sustain now, but you're also giving him reps, getting him that solid, like, playing time and exposure to be good in year 2, in year 3, in year 4 and beyond, when you're really, really trying to contend. That shifts a little bit when you're 6-1, whether you think you're a 6-1 team that, like, would rival the Bills and the Chiefs. Like, you're 6-1. There are many, many teams that wish they could be at this spot right now that are controlling this division the way they are. They have to grab it at this point. And so while a trade may take you a little bit away from that, like, kind of competitive rebuild, or like with an eye toward the future, replacing a second round guard, at least for a while, to get in someone else who has a little bit more experience and just to try that out, I don't think that kills Ed Ingram as your long-term starter at guard. I think it gives him more time to develop, more time to learn. And it gives you another option. Maybe Chris Reed, there's a reason Ed Ingram beat out Chris Reed for that job. So maybe he proves he's the better one in there, and he just gets a little bit of time to figure some things out. But it's part of the reason why you went and you did this strategy where you spent on a lot of low-cost options on the offensive line. Yes, it's for training camp and to figure out which one is the best there, but it's also for mid-season if you need to make a trade or need to make a switch. So I think I would largely consider it. I would probably do it, at least to see how it goes. And I think you can move him in and out this team, this coach. I think maybe a previous coaching staff might lay into Ed Ingram or make it seem like he's really getting demoted, like you are, like, horrible. And while he didn't play well today, I think this coaching staff, I think this team, the fact that they're winning and the veteran leaders that they have, I think they can smooth it over enough to where he could come back and be a productive player for them later down the season or into the next couple of years. But I think at this point, it's time to look there, because the rest of the offensive line is playing solid enough. You're getting solid production out of Garrett Bradbury. You can't have another black hole right there, because everyone else is working. And so you saw the flashes. You saw the Kirk Cousins strip sack. You saw a couple other pressure plays where the offensive line folded a little bit. And as you start playing these better teams, like thinking of Micah Parsons and the Buffalo Bills defensive line, like, you're going to need to be on your A game. And so I don't I don't see why you keep trotting out Ingram unless you just see every day at practice that he is miles ahead of Reed and Schlotman.
Yeah, I mean, this performance was actually more like what you would expect than not. So maybe they did see something in training camp that shaped the reasoning for not playing Chris Reed. But I recall he got hurt. And also, when you draft a guard in the second round, you draft him to start. And so they were probably banking on upside. But at this point, when stuff just got real today, I think at 5-2, if they had lost, we would have been still wondering, like, I don't know, is it for real? They could collapse. I mean, 6-1, you're really for real now. I mean, you're playing with the big boys. There's only a handful of teams in the entire NFL that are of your echelon when you get to 6-1. So now you need to look at who's the best man for the job. It's not like there's any sample size of Ingram playing in the past that would suggest, they should really stick with it. We've seen plenty of rookies get in games and just not be able to play. Drew Samia, which this is what it reminded me of. He honestly was playing like Drew Samia in pass protection. And that's not going to be good enough because someone will make you pay eventually. So I think that is, I don't want to say quite dire. It's almost dire though. And do they bank on the run blocking and stick with the run blocking and how the overall unit is performing okay? I don't know, because already in this game, it's not just one. He came in as the league leader in pressures allowed in the entire NFL for guards. Like this has just been happening week after week. So that has to be a consideration. And the other thing is, when you look at the secondary and how they have performed against top wide receivers these last 2 weeks, it is horrendous. And this is where a trade maybe has to be in consideration for another cornerback to potentially come in here. Cam Dantzler just got smoked by DeAndre Hopkins. So there's nothing you're doing there, but the nickel corner position, is there answers? I don't know. But if we're talking about problems that stem from this game that have, been pervasive through the entire season, yeah, you can't do much about DeAndre Hopkins catching a one-handed pass, but also you look at his overall performance, 159 yards, and then Rondale Moore adds another 92. That's very similar to what Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle did. And again, where you look down the road and you start to talk about the teams you're going to have to beat that are actually legit, and the Buffaloes, the Dallas, even next week, Terry McLaurin. They call him Scary Terry for a reason, not just because it's Halloween. He is a very good player. And there is always the potential that some of these guys are eventually going to have these huge days result in a win for them. And I don't know what the answer is exactly, because you have Patrick Peterson playing well. Harrison Smith made some plays. I don't think that Cam Bynum exactly is the issue. So is it a trade? Is it a change? Or is it something that there is no answer to? The right guard has an answer. This might have no answer whatsoever, and they're just going to have to match other teams. Our guy for your guy, week in and week out. Jefferson versus Tyreek, Jefferson versus DeAndre Hopkins, Jefferson versus Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, and on down the line. Because I don't think that there is an easy button to push outside of looking for some help. Because even when they got pressure, it's still the number one wide receiver was able to have a massive day against them.
Yeah, and again, now at 6-1, I'm just viewing everything through a playoff lens. And if you go through the teams that they could see in the playoffs, it's the Eagles and it's A.J. Brown. And you like A.J. Brown's matchup against any one of the Vikings cornerbacks. You go to the Cowboys, there's CeeDee Lamb. You got no one that's going to cover CeeDee Lamb. You go to even the Bucks, who are really bad, but you assume is going to figure it out. They've got Mike Evans. They have Chris Godwin. You go to the Rams if they make the playoffs. That's Cooper Kupp. You go to the 49ers. They've got Deebo Samuel. Every single one of these teams has one of these guys, has these game-changing guys. And so Hopkins catches 12 of his 13 targets. He looks unstoppable. The one target he doesn't catch is a dropped pass in his hands that he should have caught. He should have gone 100%, caught every single one of his targets. Like, that is not a sustainable way to play defense. And it was Dantzler. It was anyone that he was matched up against. And it's not, I'm not really taking a slight at Cam Dantzler or Patrick Peterson or Chandon Sullivan. None of these guys should be thought of to shut down a number one wide receiver. None of them are good enough to shut down a number one wide receiver. So you're going to have to bracket him. You're going to have to double them. You're going to have to find these different creative ways to do it, or you're just going to have to let him, kind of like you would in basketball, like let the one guy get his and try to figure everything else out. But you still have to contain him in terms of not allowing deep shots and trying to limit it as best as possible. And right now they just don't have a person to do that. So yeah, I think you could look to the trade market. I'm not sure if they have a shutdown option present out there that they can really go get. I think it's just about getting another solid body in the room. But I think even with another solid body, this is going to continue to be a problem. So I think it's just something they're going to have to work around. They're going to have to get creative, how they scheme different things. They're going to have to be flexible in how they pressure. They're going to have to do all these other things because they have to make up for the talent deficit. And I'm just not sure there's an easy trade partner out there that makes them 100% better and kind of solves that problem for them.
Now, I will say on the good side, but we'll see side, their run defense. The Arizona had run the ball fairly effectively with Benjamin back there for the last few weeks, and that did not happen at all today. Delvin Tomlinson, though, getting banged up, normally a guy who's been incredibly healthy throughout his career, and we'll see how serious the injury is. It's a calf injury. But if he is out for any amount of time, that's going to be problematic. If he is not, if he's fine, then their run defense is looking elites the last few weeks. I mean, really, we go back 3 weeks, Chicago, Miami, and then this team did not do anything on the ground, and they really forced Kyler Murray to be their entire running game. You look at what the running backs did for Arizona today against the Vikings. I mean, 22 yards on 9 carries. Rondale Moore had 2 carries for 12, and Darrell Williams 5 for 8. The longest run was 9 yards.
Yep.
I mean, that is really remarkable. That's even with a running quarterback, 3.5 yards per carry, 78 total yards on the ground. If they continue to do that, it can mitigate some of the effect of number one wide receivers dominating them. I don't really know what the answer is, but if the bend don't break philosophy looks like this was a lot of breaking today, honestly. I mean, Arizona stopped themselves on a third down by fumbling the ball. They stopped themselves with a few mistakes throughout the day where the Vikings defense quote came up big, but it was more Arizona hurting themselves. Like you mentioned, the one drop pass by DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, he might have run that for a touchdown if he catches the ball. So some of the breaks did go their way in order for them to not give up more points than this. And still they end up giving up 26 points and a whole heck of a lot of yards in a close game situation, 326 to Kyler Murray today. I mean, and if he doesn't throw a totally whacked out interception where he just flung the ball up in the air, the other one was an ill-advised pass. These things definitely don't happen every single week where you get interceptions and sacks like they did today. Last thing, Paul, 6-1 Vikings. Who would have thought? Sort of me. Actually, I've picked every game correct still. 7 in a row. Correct picks. Yes, that's right. So I guess I did think they were going to be 6-1. But this to me is now the big red button. It's sitting here. It was kind of flashing, and Kwesi should have had his hand over it. If you get blown out by Arizona, maybe I'll take my hand away, and maybe I'll think, I don't want to give up any draft capital. But now that it's 6-1, mash it. That's exactly the same record as the Los Angeles Rams had last year when it was go time. It's go time. I think that sometimes teams are asking too much, but also there are more teams now that are selling at the deadline than ever. And a lot of teams are deciding we're not a legitimate contender. Take our best stuff, make it yours, and try to go win. Last year, LA got criticized for the Von Miller move. It ended up working out. Not all of them do. That's life. Take a shot at it. And I think the position, tell me if you disagree, that they have to take a shot at is wide receiver. Adam Thielen banged up again today, had a decent day and came up with a big catch. He ends up with 67 yards on 6 receptions. KJ Osborne, 2 for 8 on 5 targets. Irv Smith has not been a factor. Munt season, catching his first career touchdown, but 1 catch for 1 yard. Not super compelling for Johnny Munt to be an extra weapon here. I think if you're going to get above 7 yards per pass attempt at some point, there needs to be another body that scares the opposing defense into thinking this other person could someday run fast down the field and make a play. Right now, opposing defenses do not think that about Thielen and Osborne, and they've done very little to prove that opposing defenses should. I think that's where they should go out and kind of no matter what it takes. I mean, people would say oh, you can't give up a first. I don't know, man, you're 6-1. You actually can, because you're not these quarterbacks who are getting drafted at the top. They're all getting drafted at the top. There's 20 teams who you could make a case for drafting a quarterback. Really. I mean, think about even Las Vegas. There's all sorts of teams that are bad and that are going to draft CJ Stroud and Bryce Young and Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. They're going to take those guys. You're not getting them. And yeah, for the future,
you could lose every game. You could lose every game the rest of the season. You're not drafting high enough to get one of them.
Yeah, I mean, truly, there's that many bad teams, and also your schedule sort of suggests that you won't lose every game the rest of the season. If you are a 500 football squadron for the rest of this year, 5-5, let's do the math on that, Paul. That means you're a pretty darn good team at 11 wins. I see no reason not to do something big here in the next couple of days to bring someone in. I know it's not as easy as that, as us just saying it, but I think if they do it, I don't care what the price tag is. This is one of those years where you have a legitimate shot to go win, so go do it.
Yeah, and I think this is a struggle that teams that are contending find themselves in, and one we haven't really had to talk about with the Vikings in the last few years is that some teams try to believe their window is longer than it is, and so they don't go out and spend a first-round pick because they say, well, we could be contenders for 3, 4, 5 years. Like, why do we want to push all the chips in now? But I think you found there's always going to be 2, 3, 4 teams that push their chips in this year, and they're likely the teams that are always there at the end. It's the Bills this year. It's the Eagles going out and trading picks for Robert Quinn and going out and getting AJ Brown before the year. Like, other teams are going to pass you by with moves. They're going to go all in. They're going to see this opportunity and they're going to take it. And the Vikings at 6-1 with a bad division around you, like your two biggest contenders in the NFC are both in the same division. And you think they're going to cannibalize themselves a little bit with the Eagles and the Cowboys, to the point where you should be able to walk into that 2 seed, hopefully, with the way that the NFC South is playing, the way the NFC West is kind of cannibalizing itself as well. Like, you have it there for the taking. And so the mistake many teams make is, well, but we don't want to sacrifice the next couple of years. And I think, we've been critical about the Vikings in the past of going for it, but they were going for it when the year hadn't started and they were already thinking they were going to be mediocre, or in the middle of the year when they weren't very good and you could see the cap on it. And although this team obviously has its warts that we've talked about ad nauseum throughout these first weeks of the season, they're still 6-1 at this point. So this is a start that you dream of. This is a start that a better team, a more talented version of this Vikings team in 2, 3, 4 years might not even get to 6-1, just because that's how the bounces go. The division might not be as bad as it is this year. Like, things are lining up for them, and you just have to take it when your moment comes, and you have to run with it. And so I agree with you on the wide receiver front. I think we've agreed going back into the draft time when we wanted them to seriously consider taking a wide receiver to add. I think it opens up Justin Jefferson in so many ways. Forget what the other receiver does production-wise. It's going to help Justin Jefferson's production. You saw what Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle's presence do to the two of them, just leaving themselves so much more space because they have to account for another guy. Like the Cardinals, in an ideal world, would have had Marquise Brown this week, and that would have been scary with the way he was playing and the way DeAndre Hopkins was playing. You have that with Tampa Bay. You have that with these other teams, and the Vikings don't have that. Yeah, Thielen makes that one weird circus catch where he gets some yards after the catch, but you can see even in that play, he's not moving that fast. He has to be shifty. He has to kind of like old man vet his way around there a little bit. This team just isn't separating. KJ Osborne made a great catch in the end zone. He didn't have much separation there. Like, this team isn't going to generate a lot of separation outside of Justin Jefferson. And so if you can go get whoever it is out there on the trade market, I think you have to seriously consider it. And especially if it's a guy that you can keep on this team for the long term and want to keep on this team, if he's got a year or two of cheap deal, like, that's exactly where you want to be and the type of player you want to go after if you're going to make one of these moves. You don't need to go out and get a Dalvin Tomlinson replacement by trade. You don't need to do that, or necessarily trade for a guard. Like, those are the non-high value positions you shouldn't be going after. But if you can find a wide receiver or you can find a cornerback, those are the spots that make sense for now, make sense for later, and have the biggest upside and kind of shift the balance of power for you.
Yeah, I just think that this roster, with the way that certain guys have played that are older, has really shown, and even like you mentioned with Thielen today, but Zadarius Smith is playing great, but how many years of Zadarius Smith will you get this? How many more years of Harrison Smith will you get this? There's just a lot of players on this team that will eventually have to be moved out and bring in other guys. And who knows if those guys can be of the same star level of these players. So when they're all healthy and they're all playing at a fairly high level. Even Thielen, I think, has been okay as a number 3 type possession receiver. I mean, still a good NFL player, just not the guy that he was in 2018. When that's the case, though, when you have them healthy and they're still playing as some version of themselves, and you haven't had to overhaul 6 or 7 key players, I mean, now is the time to do it. I mean, because that won't be easy to replace a lot of the guys, whether it's this next offseason or 2 years from now. I mean, even Delvin Cook, the performance you've gotten out of him this year, there's no guarantee in the future the next guy ends up averaging 5 yards a carry like Delvin has, and his prime will eventually come to an end as well. So, yeah, I mean, I just think that this is the time, even if they didn't expect it, and the plans change basically. So this win, if you were on the fence, I think should have pushed you over the fence. That is the bottom line. So I think the fact also that it was a quality win and not one that we thought was just based on a bunch of luck and randomness. Some always is, but I thought a better played overall game than the Arizona Cardinals, which is what you're looking for. So now we're in very interesting territory. It has been since 2017 since I felt like, okay, this is kind of an all-in type of situation. It still has 2019 vibes of schedule has helped you, health and everything else. They started that year 9-3. So a long way to go until the end, but they go to Washington, winnable game after that, and then the biggest test of the year in 2 weeks. So they just ramped up the interesting meter with a whiplash football game that leaves them at 6-1. So thank you for your time, Paul. As always, we'll have the usual Monday morning Murph, Tuesday morning left guard. Other mornings there will be people on as well. It's going to be nuts, and we'll catch you all then.